And this is our very own dear Dr. Seuss.
Ted was afraid of children, I felt, because he had had almost no experience with them.
This morning, 6 Dr. Seuss children's books will no longer be published because of what are being called racist and insensitive images.
We were very good friends, and he fell in love.
And they had an affair, and Helen found out. And in the wake of that knowledge, she killed herself.
Dr. Seuss is one of the nastiest men to exist. He created disturbing depictions through his colorful cartoons. Some are raunchy and others are straight up racist. Dr. Seuss was also a terrible husband. His wife was dying of cancer when he cheated on her with her best friend. His wife was so hurt by this, she ended up taking her own life. Dr. Seuss isn't the child-friendly figure we all thought he was, so let's get into it. I'm sorry to ruin everybody's childhood, but we need to talk about Dr. Seuss. So I cover a bunch of toxic Hollywood relationships on my channel, but Dr. Seuss's marriage is one of the worst I've ever seen. And just to clarify, Dr. Seuss is no doctor. He's just some guy named Ted. It's kind of like Dr. Phil. He's not really a doctor, but he just created this name. And at one point, Dr. Seuss's second wife, Audrey, wasn't even sure if he was a medical professional or not. Before we get to Audrey and that messy situation, let's talk about Dr. Seuss's first marriage to his wife named Helen.
45 books have sold more than 100 million copies in close to 20 languages. Books with characters that didn't exist before Dr. Seuss created them. Characters with a humanity and a humor that have made children for the past 50 years demand of their parents nightly, read it again.
So like Dr. Seuss, aka Ted, his wife, Helen Palmer, was also a writer. She, like her husband, wrote children's books, and she was an editor, a philanthropist, and a big part of Dr. Seuss's success. The couple actually married all the way back in 1942, and they were together for 40 years. Unfortunately, Helen was sick for the last 13 years of their marriage. She had cancer and a few other conditions which made it really hard for her to live a happy and normal life. But instead of standing by his wife Helen's side through excruciating times, Dr. Seuss, Ted, ended up having an affair with one of her best friends. What's sick about Dr. Seuss is that he was very public with his affair with Audrey, and he pretty much showed her off even though the public knew that he had a sick wife at home. And this really broke Helen's heart and led her to ultimately dying.
And they had an affair, and Helen found out. And in the wake of that knowledge, and also because she felt like she was no longer the woman she was before those illnesses, she killed herself.
His cruel infidelity broke Helen's heart. She was already dying slowly inside, and instead of allowing the cancer to overcome her, she decided to take it into her own hands. She died on October 23rd, 1967, and she left behind a note addressed to her husband. And she told Ted that she can't imagine a life without him. Let's read her letter together. Dear Ted, what happened to us? I don't know. I feel myself in a spiral going down, down, down into a black hole from which there's no escape, no brightness. And loud in my ears from every side, I hear failure, failure, failure. I love you so much. I'm too old and enmeshed in everything you do and are that I cannot conceive of a life without you. My going will leave quite a rumor, but you can say I was overworked and overwrought. Your reputation with your friends and fans will not be harmed. Aw, sometimes think of the fun we had through the years. The suicide note did not make much of a difference to Dr. Seuss, who ultimately married his mistress. But it's so eerie to read that letter because she was so infatuated with her husband. She wanted to protect him even though he did horrible things to her. And he didn't even call her out for the affair in that letter. She really just reassured him that his reputation will be okay and that she's just ready to go. There are some rumors that Dr. Seuss became physical with his wife, and that was part of their relationship. But those are just rumors. We don't have any legal records showing that this man put his hands on his wife. But I mean, I can't imagine her going to the police and reporting this if she's so forgiving to him in that letter. After Helen's death, it didn't take long for Dr. Seuss to fully embrace Audrey. They were already public, but their relationship quickly started moving along and they ended up getting married, which is it just rubs me the wrong way because Audrey was good friends with Helen, and after Helen died and Audrey stole her man, she went around and did press speaking about Helen.
We were very good friends. I was something else again that he hadn't happened to come up against. And he fell in love.
So Ted and Audrey ended up getting married less than a year after Helen passed away. And luckily, I guess Helen and Ted, Dr. Seuss, didn't have any children of their own. But Audrey had some kids from her previous relationship. But Audrey was actually married when she started getting involved with Dr. Seuss, and they ended up divorcing because of that relationship. She also had children with this man, and she ended up sending those kids to boarding school because Dr. Seuss doesn't actually like kids. So this woman, Audrey, literally dropped off her husband, dropped off her kids, and just left her old life behind to go and be with this man. So she abandoned her daughters, who were 9 and 14 years old. She was quoted saying they wouldn't have been happy with Ted, and Ted wouldn't have been happy with them. He was afraid of children, she said, especially their unpredictability. And it actually turns out that this was public knowledge that Dr. Seuss didn't like kids. Some of his artwork is controversial and straight up mean, like this one where they write, "And the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones. But those were foreign children, and it didn't really matter." Obviously, this is some political statement, but it's also just a weird message about kids. Supposedly, Ted, Dr. Seuss, had a rule of his own, and he said when it comes to children, quote, "You make them and I'll amuse them."
Ted was afraid of children, I felt, because he had had almost no experience with them.
Despite the fact that he will go down in history as one of the most prolific authors of children's books, Dr. Seuss didn't have children of his own.
It's probably for the best that those kids did not live with him and that he did not have children, but it's really shady that Audrey would go and send her kids off like that. And supposedly they spoke about it later on and they made amends, but I would have some resentment against my mother. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Dr. Seuss's art, because some of his art is repulsive.
This morning, 6 Dr. Seuss children's books will no longer be published because of what are being called racist and insensitive images. The publishing company saying the decision comes after months of discussion, saying these books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong.
Dr. Seuss had a long career as an artist, and at some point he worked for some marketing companies, and he also just created art in general. And there are tons of really nasty ads he created. For example, a pesticide company hired him, and he created these ads which portrayed Black people in a negative way.
But could this cartoon now chip away at the image of the beloved author?
Before joining the war effort, Ted Geisel had a job in advertising, where he did work for a company called Standard Oil of New Jersey, later Esso, and their product Flit, a bug spray.
The earliest work of Dr. Seuss paid him for crafting oil and pesticide ads. The industry had nothing to do with racism, but Dr. Seuss poured the element into it as horrid humor. His Flit pesticide ad shows awful caricatures of Black people, something that had nothing to do with the product itself.
Many of the cartoons that he created for their ads now seem incredibly racist, featuring images of Black and Arab people done in a stereotypical way.
He was a hugely popular figure in the media before he really became popular as a children's book writer.
One of his cartoons from this time period even includes the N-word.
So there's no denying that Mr. Dr. Seuss is a racist. Here's another racist cartoon. You guys can pause and read for yourself, but it has to do with black labor and white labor and the war industry, and all of these just really rub me the wrong way and make me uncomfortable. In his book titled If I Ran the Zoo, he depicts two African men in grass skirts without shoes or shirts. The demeaning depiction of black people spread throughout his cartoons. In short, Dr. Seuss's cartoons were the product of his racist mentality.
Depictions in the books show Asians with lines for eyes and Africans wearing grass skirts. One of the books, If I Ran the Zoo, includes a drawing of a white man with a gun standing on a cage that's propped up on the heads of what appear to be three Asian men. It also includes dark silhouettes and what looks like a stereotypical depiction of a Middle Eastern man on a camel.
And it seems like Dr. Seuss was an opinionated man because when political things went down, he had a lot to say through his art. Specifically about Japanese people, it seemed like he had a really big problem with them because of the political issues at this time. The government actually commissioned a full artistic license to produce educational cartoons for the troops, and Dr. Seuss dived right in, and he made horrible cartoons about Japanese soldiers, and the message was wrong. He also targeted Germans too in his propaganda, but the Japanese were on his hit list, which he created especially problematic and hateful slogans.
It isn't widely known that around the time of the Second World War, Dr. Seuss, along with his wife Helen, wrote a documentary called Design for Death, which was released in 1947. It was based on a military training film about Japanese culture that he also wrote, called Our Job in Japan.
Any sensible idea, any modern idea, the Japanese brain, like our brain, can learn when it is taught.
Though at the time it may have been considered to actually be sympathetic to the Japanese, in retrospect it's quite clearly pro-war propaganda. Design for Death went on to win the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature.
Dr. Seuss has a lot more horrific art we could break down if you guys want a deeper dive video, but some of his work can't even be shown on YouTube. Eventually, Dr. Seuss died on September 24th, 1991 at the age of 87, and he actually passed away from cancer, which you guys may remember his first wife had cancer and she was struggling, so it's interesting to see that he eventually passed away of that. But I want to hear what you guys think in the comments below. Here's my email if you have any other video ideas for me, and I'll see you in a new one soon. Bye, guys.